Welcome once again to a video. This is Jennifer McGuire and I'm very thankful you are visiting today. So in this video, I'm sharing some new ways to create see-through card designs. So the front of these cards are formed by adhering together lots of die cuts, and you can actually see through between them to the inside of the card. Now, I'm a big fan of doing see-through cards. I think it's a great way to step up your die cuts and create something new and very unique. But I have done a see-through card video in the past. I'll link to it up here in the top right if you want to check that out too. Today I have 3 more versions for you and 3 ways to go about assembling them. Let's start with this one. This actually uses a layered border die, and I connected the pieces together to create the front of the card. For adhering a lot of the die cuts in today's video, I'll be using a double-sided adhesive sheet. I am very excited about the new Altenew double-sided adhesive sheets. I have been searching and trying every adhesive sheet I can find because I was getting frustrated with how thin some of my die cutting friendly adhesive sheets are. Well, this is nice and sturdy. It has a little thickness to it, but it still die cuts wonderfully. I also like that the release paper on both sides has a print on it so you can easily see it. This is a permanent adhesive, so it is going to hold together nicely. I like that I have a little bit of flexibility until I press it into place, so I can get my die cuts positioned just right when using this. Now, when I want to put it onto a piece of cardstock, I cut a piece of the double-sided adhesive to the same size, peel back half of the release paper, you can see me doing that there. Then I put my cardstock and the adhesive sheet into the corner of my MISTI and press it down. That makes sure it's lined up. Now I can remove the rest of the release paper, and we have cardstock backed with the double-sided adhesive. I will say you don't really need to use the corner of something to help you line it up, which you'll see later. It's really a nice and sturdy adhesive sheet with the release paper, so it's easy to line up without messing up. Okay, so I'm using for this first card the Altenew Swirl Motif dies. These are beautiful border dies. One cuts a solid motif and the other creates the kind of an outline for it to layer on top. So I'll be using this to form a background. So I have a piece of cardstock here that is backed with that double-sided adhesive already. So that's the piece you just saw me put together. I'm putting tape over my die here, and I'll run it through my die cut machine. Here I use my Gemini Junior. Any die cut machine should work. And you can see how well it die cut through the cardstock and the adhesive. I'm really excited about that. So you can see this leftover piece here I can trim down and then use as a border on a card too. So I'm going to save that leftover piece. So I do have all the little pieces still in my die that we can add onto the solid die cut when we have that ready. So this is all the little detail pieces. So I'll set that aside. Now I need to cut from cardstock the solid border die. So this is the other of the 2 border dies. And this is just regular cardstock. There's no adhesive on the back of it. It's not needed for this. Now I wanted to show you a really cool trick that you can do with layering dies. So I'm taking my solid die cut and I'm lining it up with the other die, the die that is the second layer or the detailed layer, the one we cut out before from adhesive back cardstock. I'm lining it up there, so you can see my die cut is lined up with the cutting edge, and I'm going to make an impression. This time I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum machine because I can bring it up in the camera. I'm putting down my embossing mat, which the machine comes with, many do, laying down my cardstock and then the die on top, and then the embossing plate on top and running that through. This will make an impression of the more detailed border die onto our solid border die cut. Now look how pretty that is. You could either use either side. See how this side has the raised, the other side has the indentation. Just a really cool look. But the reason I made that impression with the detailed die is so that it can help me to line up my detailed die cut on the solid die cut. So remember, this detailed die cut here has adhesive on the back already, thanks to that double-sided adhesive sheet, and you can see it die cut very nicely. So I'm lining this up with the indentations that we made with the die onto the solid piece, and it makes it so easy to line it up, and it actually gives a little more texture looking to the final result. So I'm laying those pieces there. You can see how you can move it around until you press it down. So you have some flexibility, but it holds very well. So I continued to add the layered pieces to that one. Next, I wanted to show you another way you could do that process. Once again, I have a solid die cut here where I made the impression. And then I have the detailed die that I have once again cut from cardstock with adhesive on the back. This time I'm leaving the die cut in the die, but popping out the extra in between pieces. That's what you see me doing here. So here's a closer look at the die. You can see my cardstock with the adhesive backing and release paper still in the die. Now I'm going to use my piercer to remove the release paper from the die cut. So what will happen is you'll see our cardstock in there with the adhesive exposed. I'll then flip this over, lay it right onto our solid die cut, and kind of pop it into that impression that we made. And then I'll press that down. Once I've pressed it down to kind of catch into that adhesive, I will flip it over and use my piercing tool to poke through each of the holes to make sure the cardstock die cut is pressed into the cardstock solid piece behind it. So now we can remove that and check it out. All of our detail pieces are in place. I just use a bone folder to press it down, and that is such a fun and easy way to do an die cut inlay technique or layering technique, as you see me do here. So that's just two of the ways you can layer die cuts when you have adhesive on the back of the top layer, whatever works better for you. So I created 4 layered borders. You can see all 4 of them here. And now I'm gluing them together to form a sheet of this pattern. So I'm kind of tucking the die cuts into each other and putting a very strong liquid adhesive between where they touch. This is Honeybee precision glue. I find any strong glue like this or Gina K Connect works very well. This Honeybee precision glue has a finer point, and so that's why I decided to use it here, because I'm getting into tiny spots with it. So there you can see 2 are connected so far. I will repeat this process until I have all 4 connected. You could do this same technique with layering background dies or with a regular background die. I wanted to show you today that the see-through card front works great even with border dies, such as this beautiful die set. So basically you just want to come up with a die cut area that's bigger than your card, and that's what I've got here. It's bigger than what my final card will be, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And it's see-through, which makes it really cool. Next, we need to create the backing to our card and the hinge for the top. I'm not really sure at this point what size I want, so I took a piece of cardstock and scored it at 6 1/2 inches. I'm thinking at this point I might make my card bigger than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, but I end up cutting it down. So I fold there at 6 1/2 inches, and then I'm going to cut the width down to be about 4 3/4, but again, later I'll trim it down smaller. Now that big flap there, we don't need it that big. I'm going to cut it down to be around a 1/2 inch. You'll see me do this on my next example too, so you'll get a better feeling of what that flap is for. So now I have my card front that's see-through and my card back, which is the white. I'm putting glue, strong glue, along the top edge of my see-through piece and gluing it onto that little flap at the top of the back of our card. So you can see it's glued to that flap, and that's what creates our hinge so that we have a card that opens up. Now the cardstock I use for this is layered. Remember, it's 2 die cuts glued together, so it's strong enough to be a card front. If you're using a very thin adhesive or a non-layering die, I recommend using double layers. You want those die cuts on the front to be strong enough to be a card front on their own. So there I ended up trimming it down, so my card overall is about 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. Just to make that little hinge on the top a little less noticeable, I'm trimming off a little bit of the white that's peeking out. See, I'm cutting between the pattern there. You don't have to do this, but I thought it kind of helped to hide the flap there on the top. And now we have a card front that is completely see-through. Now for the focal point on the front of the card, I'm using the Altenew nesting label die set. This is an older one that I've used many times. And I'm also using an older Altenew Bold Thanks die. This has the shadow and the individual letters in a modern feel that I really like. I also use the sentiments from the Altenew Pen Sketched Silhouette stamp set, which you'll see me use in a moment. So I cut the shadow from white and the letters from green and glued those together and then onto the label. Now I have my MISTI stamping tool and a sticky mat. That sticky mat will hold the die cut in place as we stamp on it. So I'm lining up the first sentiment towards the top there, and this says sending lots of. Then underneath it we'll stamp more of a sentiment, and these are cut from sentiments in that silhouette stamp set that I just showed you. Look around at your stamp sets. You'll find little bits and pieces you can mix and match to form a new greeting. Now when I stamped this, I didn't realize I had a piece of fuzz on my stamp when I inked it up, so I need to do it over again. That's okay, I just tore the sentiment off carefully, and now I have another die cut. I'll glue the sentiment on this new die cut and re-stamp those sentiments. Instead of letting that label go to waste, I'm putting glue on the top of it and gluing it behind the piece I do like, so it gives it some dimension. I like to use scraps for that to build up dimension. It holds up through the mail much better than using a foam square or foam dots. You could also use craft foam cut to the same size if you prefer. So now I'm putting glue on the back of the label, and I have my card open, and I'm centering this towards the top center. Then I'll flip it over, and I have another of the same die. I'm putting adhesive on the back of this, being pretty generous to make sure it's spread around, but not too much glue that it oozes out. I'll line it up with the die cut on the front, and that hides our adhesive and also sandwiches the see-through card front between the die cuts. I have a third die cut here. I'm putting adhesive on that. I'll line it up with the die cut on the inside, but with the adhesive face up towards the camera. Once it's lined up, I will carefully close my card onto it. This will position this die cut in the same spot as it is on the front, but it'll be on the inside of the card, and that's a place where we can write our personal message, and you won't be able to see it when the card is closed. So here is a look at the completed card. It killed me not to add any embellishments, but I thought this looked best without any pearls or gems added to it. It's just a very clean-cut look, but the interest comes from that see-through card front. It's nice and strong because I used 2 layers of cardstock, remember the background and then the detail on it, and I used a strong double-sided adhesive. So this example shows how you can use border dies or layered dies to create a see-through card front. Okay, so I have another see-through card front for you. This time I used different layering die cuts together and connected them to create the card front. For this, I used a new Altenew layering die set called Layered Wood Flower Dies. I am crazy about this set. Now the solid bottom layer of the flower and the leaves, I cut from regular cardstock. Now all the layers that go on top of those, I did first put the Altenew double-sided adhesive on the back of the cardstock before I die cut them. And this makes it so much easier. So watch, I have a layer of a leaf here. I removed the release paper and I can just pop it right on the solid piece, press it down, and we have our layered die cut. It is so much of a time saver over using liquid adhesive on all the details on the back of these die cuts. Having the adhesive already on the cardstock when you die cut is such a time saver. You can see how the middle of the flowers, the yellow and brown there, are very detailed. So having the release paper already on the back is such a helpful thing. Okay, so now I have a piece of white cardstock here that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, but I am not gluing anything on it. I am just arranging my die cuts on it. That's why I'm kind of holding them in place. I have 2 of the large flower, and I want to surround that with a bunch of the layered leaves that I created with that layering die set and the double-sided adhesive between the layers. So I'm holding those blue flowers, tucking some green leaves to come out, making sure there will be some openings so you can tell that the front of the card is see-through. Now the reason I have the white cardstock sitting in the back is so I know how much of an area I need to cover to form that see-through card front. So it's just kind of a guide. I need to kind of stay in that box but still have some things hang off so you can really get that nice cut edge. Okay, so now I have them all arranged on there. I'm moving them around. And next I have a piece of Altenew masking paper. This is new and it has a lot of stick to it and is pretty thick. I cut it to be the same size and I'm laying it on top to grab all of those die cuts and connect them together. Now I can remove the cardstock from the back And now we're looking at the back of those die cuts. You could always use press and seal or masking tape for that process if you want. Next, I have a smaller piece of white cardstock. I'm backing it with the Altenew double-sided adhesive, removing the release paper and gluing that right in the center so that I have kind of a base there that connects everything. I kind of wish I had done that in green, but I did it in white and it seemed to work fine. Now I'm going in, and where any of the leaves overlap, I put a little bit of liquid adhesive to make sure they're glued together. So really what I'm trying to do here is connect all of those pieces. Once that's dry, I can remove the masking paper, and I'm saving that masking paper because I can use it again on another card. So there we have everything connected. There are a few ways you can do that. I just found this to be the easiest to make sure I got the arrangement just right for the front of the card. I am going through and adding a little bit of liquid adhesive in between all the die cuts just to make sure they're all secured. You don't want the front of the card falling apart when the recipient gets it. Next, I will hold that on the top of my white 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of white cardstock, flip it over and cut anything that's hanging off the edge. So we have that nice clean cut edge. You could arrange it instead so that all of the leaves are on the front and you don't have to cut anything off, but I like the look of having it trimmed off and kind of squared off. Next, I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding white note card, and I cut off most of 1/2 of that, so there's that little flap at the top. I'm putting adhesive towards the top of my leaves and gluing that onto that little flap as we did on our last card. I also cut a piece of blue cardstock that I will glue on the inside, and that's the area in which I'll write my personal message, and it'll be hidden when the card is closed. So here's a look at the completed card. I added my sentiment to the front, but you can see those see-through elements on the sides and the bottom there between the leaves. It's really cool. I did add a lot of die cuts to this. You could leave more gaps if you wanted to, which you'll see in my next example. But that little hinge on the top allows that see-through card front to be strong enough yet really act as a card front. So it'll still stand up nicely and still hold up nicely. For the sentiment, I used the Altenew Fancy Thanks die for the script, and for the So Very Much, I used the Altenew Leaf Canopy stamp set, both of which I've used many times in videos. And although I used layering dies for this example, you could use regular die cuts too. Okay, my third example shows how to create a hinge on it a little bit differently, and it has a lot more see-through area. This will go to show you that any dies will work for this see-through card front. You just need to connect them so you form a strong card front. Now for this, I'm using a great new die set, the Altenew Just Leaves dies. I am a huge fan of leaf stamp sets and die sets because they can be made to look masculine or feminine. They can be used with flowers or without. You just can do a lot with them. They make a nice backdrop too. Well, what I did today is I cut all the different leaves, actually not all the leaf dies, but the smaller ones. I cut from some different colors of green cardstock that I found in my scrap drawer. I thought it'd be fun to mix and match a bunch of different colors. I also cut these dies from white cardstock. So I have a bunch of white leaf die cuts and a bunch of green leaf die cuts ready to go. Because these are delicate die cuts, you see there's those thin areas of the stem or whatever, that means I need to make sure that the die cuts are stronger. So I'm going to double them up. Here's a trick that I really like to do. I have my sticky mat, the same mat that I had in my MISTI earlier, and I am taping behind it a piece of white cardstock that's 4 1/4 by 5.5. You could do whatever cardstock there. It's just, again, a guide for me to arrange my leaves in that area. This sticky mat is going to help me hold those die cuts in place as I arrange them. I could have done this on the last example too, but I didn't think of it at the time. Now I'm starting there at the top. Notice the top of my cardstock is lined up with the edge of my sticky mat. And I have some leaves sticking off of it. I've overlapped the leaves that I've arranged there at the top. And I go and I squeeze a little bit of liquid adhesive anywhere those leaves overlap. You need the die cuts to overlap so they stay connected. So you'll see I'm kind of starting from the top and working my way down. That way I don't end up with any gaps that are too weak to form a card front. Each time I put a little drop of liquid adhesive wherever they connect. It doesn't even matter if your adhesive's showing because we'll cover this up with colored die cuts in a moment. So I'll continue to do this until I have that entire area covered by connected leaves. I now will use a little bone folder tool here to rub right across where the edge of the sticky mat is, right along those die cuts that are sticking off of it. Those little leaf die cuts will be my hinge. So I created that score line there on all of those little leaf die cuts, and I'm going to fold right along that. So this time, instead of creating a card backing with a flap at the top, the hinge on my card will be these little folded over die cuts. So that's another option that you can do that gives a cleaner look from the front. Now we need to glue this to the card backing. This is that piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white cardstock. You could do color or pattern paper if you want. I'm laying this on top and then lining up my folded scored leaves up there with the top of the card. So we have that score line on those leaves hanging off. I'm putting liquid adhesive outside of that score line. So just on those little pieces that'll be folded over. And then I will wrap that around the top of this 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece. So you can see all those little leaves hanging off the top there have adhesive on it. I'm just going to fold them down. I have enough pieces there that it forms the hinge for our card. So I'll press those down until I'm sure they're dry. Make sure you have enough adhesive there that it's very secure. Now we have a card front made of white die cuts and a card back made of white cardstock. Now I want to add my green die cuts on top of the white. I'm going to stick a piece of scrap paper in here that's colored just so you can see through better. Because the inside's white, it's harder to see these white die cuts. On top of each of these white die cuts on the front, I'm putting liquid adhesive and then adding a green die cut that matches it. So it's the same die was used. The bottom one is white, the top one is green. This doubles up our die cuts and allows them to kind of be sandwiched in between each other so that the connection between each of the individual die cuts is strong and secure. Now on some of them, I'm using this Altenew Dotted Lines Debossing die to add a pierced texture to the die cuts. I thought it'd be fun, instead of them all being flat, some of them will have this pierced texture on it. I really like this new debossing die. It's great for a card front because it doesn't cut an outside edge. You can just open up your card, put this on it, run it through your die cut machine, and you get that pierced pattern. I use piercing dies like this a lot, and it's great for adding texture to die cuts as I'm doing here. And I'll link to a video where I talk more about that technique if you want to check it out. Okay, so now that I've added the piercing to this little green flower die cut, I put glue on top of the white one, and then I'll line this green one on top of it. So I'm just looking for green die cuts that match the white die cut that I have connected together. And we're just going to keep gluing these green on top of the white, allowing us to form a more secure and stronger card front. You could have made the leaves on the bottom green instead of white, but I just thought the white was easier. And it also shows you could make them all from white cardstock and then maybe ink over it. Lots of things you can do with it. So these beautiful intricate leaf dies show you that you can do the see-through card technique with any type of die cuts. You just need to make sure that they're connected in spots to form the card front. Now you could do hearts, you could do stars, you could do flowers, you could do any different shape you may have. And I think these leaves were a great example of that. Here you can see how the leaf of the last green leaf I put down is now sandwiched between this one, making it even more secure. I usually kind of start on the outside edge and then fill into the middle. Okay, so here's what we have so far. I think it looks so cool having all those green leaves connecting to make the card front. Now all I need to do is flip it over and cut off anything that's hanging off. Now notice there at the top you can see our folded over white leaves that are forming the hinge of our card. If you want to cover that up, you can cut another piece of white cardstock to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 and glue it on the back. I decided not to do that. It's just part of the handmade feel of it, but you could definitely do that to have a cleaner back for your card if you prefer. Okay, now on this, I wasn't sure what to do. I loved it at this point, and I really wanted to leave it as is, but you could add a fun flower on the front of this. You could add a simple sentiment. I decided to do a circle element with a modern sentiment once again. So I die cut a bunch of circles. The light green circles are a little bit smaller than the white circles. The light green circle for the front, I did use that piercing die to make the piercing pattern on it, which you'll see in a moment. And I glued that on a slightly larger white circle. That's what I got here. And I'm gluing it to the front of my leaves. Make sure your card is open when you do this so you don't glue your card shut. Now I have another white circle, and I'm kind of covering that with liquid adhesive, not too much, but you want to cover the whole back of the circle, and then line that up with the circle on the front. That gives you a clean look when the card is open. Last but not least, I have my other green circle. I'm putting adhesive on the back of that and gluing it to a slightly bigger white circle. Then I'll put glue on the back of the white, line it up with the circle there that we just glued down, have the adhesive facing up, close the card on it, and now we have the circle on the inside of the card, which is the place where I'll write my personal sentiment, so it's hidden when the card is closed. To finish off the card, I added that bold thanks die that I used on my first card example. I like that it has a clean and modern look to it. It's different than what I normally do. I also added a few green pearls. Now you could add flowers to this, you could add pops of color, whatever you want, but I wanted to keep it all nice and greens for one of my friends who loves potted plants. Here you can see how the front of the card is see-through, and it shows through to the white. Remember, you can put a backing on it if you want a clean look, but this is such a fun way to use your die cuts creatively to make a see-through card front. I wanted to mention again, I think it's really important to use heavyweight cardstock with your cards. Holding a card that's floppy is just kind of takes away from all the effort we put into a card. So if you do have a lighter weight cardstock, you could double it up or just use a heavyweight cardstock to begin with. By the way, take a closer look at the detail of that debossing die on some of the leaves and also on that green circle. It really makes a big difference in the final result. All right, there you have it. Some more ideas for creating see-through card fronts using your die cuts. I really recommend checking out the other video that I've done on this technique. It'll give you more ideas so that hopefully you can do this technique with products you already have. If you did want to check out anything I used here, especially that double-sided adhesive, which will definitely be my favorites thing for this year, that's all linked below in my YouTube description. You can also go to my blog, which is on the top right up here. They always have so much more information there. And in the middle are a couple other related videos. I once again thank you for visiting. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you again very soon.